Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms where we provide information services, resources, activities for people who work in and around the global MedComms business. So by that, I'm talking people who work in and around medical communications, medical publishing, medical education, and so on. And we also produce a lot of resources for people who want to learn about MedComms. If you go to firstmedcommsjob.com, you'll find lots of information, insights into the business. One of the things we're doing at the moment, running these webinars, they're great for involving people from all over the world, and it's lovely to see we've got quite an international audience again today. And we can talk about topics of relevance to MedComms. And today I'm absolutely delighted we've got Nick and Andria from redthread, and we're going to talk about specifically about medical writing in value communications, which is one of the sort of speciality areas, I guess, of MedComms. And we'll talk about what's involved and the sorts of people who work in there and the sorts of working life that they have, and hopefully give you insight into that part of the business. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick, who is going to lead with a presentation. We're going to have a presentation and a Q&A. So members of the audience, please be ready to ask your questions or share your own insights, and we'll weave that into the discussion. But first, I'm going to hand over to Nick. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Peter. Hello, everybody. As Peter said, my name's Nick. I'm the founder, managing director of redthread Market Access, which is a value communications consultancy. We focus predominantly on writing and consulting, and we've been going for about sort of 18 months or so. But our real niche is market access and value communications, and that's what we'd like to have a chat about today. And I'm joined by my colleague Andria as well.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Andria, and I'm a medical writer at Market Access.
Fantastic. So it is not death by PowerPoint today. What I would like to try to do is to give a little bit of a sense of who payers are, what they're interested in, how it sort of fits into the overall drug life cycle, what sort of projects we do, and importantly, I guess, how to write for a payer audience, because I think sometimes it's seen as a little bit of a black box, and there are some complexities to it, but by and large, there's a lot of similarities between more traditional medical communications for clinicians and communications for payers as well. So this is probably fairly familiar to a lot of people in terms of the overall drug discovery, bringing a drug to market. So through drug discovery, preclinical, clinical trials, regulatory review, manufacturing, and reimbursement. And reimbursement is typically where we're focusing on when we're talking about payers. Who is paying for the drug? And what payers are often looking for is this an appropriate use of limited healthcare resources, by which we mean essentially money. Money is not it's not limitless, and there are difficult decisions to be made in terms of prioritization of healthcare resources. You give it to a patient with this specific patient with diabetes, or this particular patient population. Do we look at this cancer more than this other cancer? And it's making those value-based judgments on what is good allocation of healthcare budget within a particular healthcare system. And payers have got quite a lot of questions that they're likely to ask. You know, they're interested: who is the patient? You know, how much budget do I need to find? What's the overall budget impact of this new treatment that you're bringing through? Does it work? What's the efficacy? Does it improve quality of life? How will it impact healthcare service delivery in terms of how we give it in a hospital, or is it tricky to prepare in the pharmacy? Or, you know, these things are what payers are thinking about in terms of often the holistic, how do we incorporate this new therapy into the healthcare system? And there's lots of different payers, lots of different types of payers, and there's a variety of different payers and organizations within individual countries. Each healthcare system is different. Each healthcare system is set up differently in terms of who has the balance of power and control, and who decides on what is an efficient use of healthcare resources or not. And on the slide, you can see just a few organizations from the US, from the UK, from Germany. They're all payers, and you can see that there's a mix of government organizations, patients, private insurers, and that mix differs according to different countries. but broadly you can categorize them into 5 typical buckets. It's a slightly simplistic view, but I think it's helpful to understand who we are writing for when writing for payers, because what we write about needs to resonate with these particular payer stakeholders. They're interested in particular aspects of value of a therapy. And they sit at different levels within these countries. So they might sit nationally. So in the UK, for example, there's NICE and other organizations like that who are looking at things from a whole population level, looking at the UK or England in general. And then there are regional levels where you're looking more specifically about the healthcare system within a particular region, or locally looking at the level of, for example, an individual hospital. And there are payers there who will look at, their hospital budget, benefits to individual patients, for example. There are private payers. In the US, for example, healthcare is often reimbursed by large healthcare insurance companies such as United Health Group, Kaiser, etc. And they are the ones who make the decisions. You pay your premium, and what you're allowed at what stage and what preconditions is decided by payers, pharmacy benefit managers within those organizations. And we also have to think about patients as well. Even in the UK, there's a prescription charge in terms of paying for medicines, but in other countries there's substantial co-pays where patients have to pay fairly sizable amounts towards their own the cost of their therapies. And so a patient is also considered a payer as well. And so this is sort of the who that we're often writing for, and the information that we provide to each of these stakeholders differs a little bit because they're all interested in slightly different things. Excuse me, sorry. And even within these particular payer groups, they assess information and are interested in information in a slightly different way. So if we're thinking about the national, regional, and local payers, in Germany and France, for example, the national payer organizations there are broadly looking at additional clinical benefit of a therapy. Does it provide a clinical benefit in specific outcomes versus a comparator? Whereas in other countries, in England, for example, there's much more emphasis on cost effectiveness. So weighing up the added costs of a therapy versus the added benefit that's provided, and creating a calculation based on the thresholds that we have in this country about what is cost effective and what isn't cost effective. So what we're interested in is trying to distill down what each individual payer is interested in and provide them the information to enable them to make that decision. And that's why it's one of the reasons that I really like value communications. It's that puzzle, and you put your payer hat on and trying to think about who the audience are, who the audience is and what they're interested in, and providing them with clear information on what represents value for that particular therapy for them. From UK perspective, the UK is a good example of how you need to tailor what you're writing about for individual audiences, because NICE are interested in one particular thing, and other organizations are interested in different information. It means that there's plenty of potential for pharma to interact with target stakeholders, with their customers, but it means that you can go from talking at a population level about the cost effectiveness of a drug and whether it represents value for money, all the way down to an individual hospital and what the impact of them will be for them in terms of the formulary that they have and how they deliver services within that hospital. So it's thinking about the value of a therapy at those levels and tailoring your messaging so that it resonates with those stakeholders. There's a real variety of projects that we would do as part of value communication. I think a lot of everybody probably define value communications a little bit differently. By and large, I see it as communicating with payers. And there's a variety of different types of deliverables that we would do as part of that, but a lot of it I think would be familiar to medical writers. You know, if you work more traditionally in clinician communications, a lot of the same skills and a lot of the same information you will see in our the deliverables that we would do in value communications, because it isn't just about the money when it comes to payers. You know, they want to know what they're going to get for their money, and so they want to know, does the drug work? What's the benefit of that particular drug? And importantly, they want to try to minimize as much as they can the risk of spending their money unwisely. I think maybe that's a little bit too simplistic, but a lot of the time there is uncertainty in the data that the pharmaceutical companies are taking to customers, and that's not through any fault of the pharma company. That's essentially saying that, you know, overall survival data takes a long time to collect, and we don't necessarily know what the overall survival of a therapy will be 5-10 years hence, and therefore it's quite difficult to calculate what the relative value for money of one therapy is versus another therapy. So in terms of the projects, I put some examples up on the screen. I think, you know, looking at global value dossiers and HTA submissions, those are fairly chunky writing projects, you know, 100 pages or thereabouts. There's a lot of clinical detail in there. There's some economic modeling data in there as well, but by and large, they are sort of chunky dossier type projects, but you need to tell a clear story within them. A global value dossier will be done for a global pharma company. The HTA submissions are usually done on a country-to-country basis. So there's opportunities to work with pharma companies at different levels, with the global team, putting together a value proposition for a new therapy, down to the individual HTA submissions, a nice submission for England, for example. Value proposition that we have on the slide is essentially the core value, and I've got a slide on it coming up in a second, but the core value of a therapy, say what is the value of this therapy versus competitors, and why is it worth reallocating limited healthcare budget for this therapy versus any other therapy. Other types of deliverables we might do, so formulary packs and business cases, these would be more relevant to a local, perhaps individual hospital level. If you're looking at service change within a particular hospital, that can be really helpful to say, look, this is the therapy, this is what it looks like, this is how we think the service within your hospital needs to change, and here's a business case to say that if you make this change, this is what we think the benefit for you will be. And so a lot of the time it's just clearly delineating what the value of this particular therapy is, not just from a clinical perspective, but supplementing it with that economic perspective as well. We do quite a lot of primary research, so going out and talking to payers to understand, so that we understand what they want. And what you tend to find out from that is that payers in different countries want different things. But it's very helpful to have that perspective, because if you've got your payer hat on, then you can write better for them, essentially. Landscape assessments, looking at the market access landscape, competitor landscape analyses. This is all information and project types, I think, that will and should be familiar to people who have worked in medical communication before. We do a lot of digital payer tools. These are quite nice because you can then adapt. Every payer wants information which is tailored to them, and these digital payer tools, if you put some nice data behind them, mean that you can really tailor the presentation and say, look, for your particular patient population that you've got with the competitors in your system, this is what we think the benefits will be. So they're quite nice, and we do publications as well, typically from a HEOR market access perspective. A value proposition, which I've already said, a lot of what we put into it in terms of the overall holistic value of a particular therapy is familiar. I'm not going to go into detail on this slide, but the clinical impact, the efficacy, the real-world effectiveness, comparative efficacy, safety and tolerability. This is all information which will be going into communication with clinicians already. Treatment pathway, the same. Patient impact, burden of illness, quality of life, etc. all of this is important, and it's important to build up the picture of, does the therapy work? Where we add our sort of additional payer thinking is talking about the economic impact, cost effectiveness, overall budget, anything in terms of pricing agreements and contracts and tenders that might go into a value proposition. And then talking about implementation, which is, how will we use this in practice, and what impact does that have on the healthcare system that it's going into? Cold chain logistics is one, for example, thinking about the COVID vaccines at the moment and thinking about Pfizer versus AZ. One of the benefits of AZ is that it doesn't have the same cold chain issues as Pfizer or Moderna that need to be kept very, very cold, and then that's obviously an issue. So these sorts of logistics are sometimes what we're thinking about as well when it comes to access considerations. Oh, sorry, I was on the wrong slide. Transitioning from clinician to payer, what I'd like to get across is that value communications, and I think health economics, can sometimes be seen as a bit of a black box. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity to bring transferable medical writing skills across to value communications. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this webinar today, is to say, look, health economics is not as complicated as maybe it appears from the outside. Yes, there are some horrible acronyms which are take a while to get your head around, and to get really into the nitty-gritty of the modeling, you've got to have a particular brain and mindset. But to write about it, you don't necessarily need to understand all of the individual bits of the model. You need to understand enough so that you can write about it. But bringing your transferable skills from a medical writing background is super helpful. All the things you do already, data analysis, brilliant writing, attention to detail, project management, client service, we do all of that, and it's absolutely incredibly important, because where good value communications work comes from is an ability to write and understanding market access. And to be able to blend those two together is something which takes some time and some training, and it's perfectly possible to do. But you see a lot of people in medical communications and a lot of people in market access, and not that many people manage to I wonder, was to know about the opportunity to blend the two, actually. And it's an area that I've worked in for 10 years and I've really enjoyed working in. So the first thing I think to making a successful sort of transition from writing about writing for payers, from writing about clinicians, is bring your transferable skills. Know your audience, think like a payer, and always think about the so what. So what are payers interested in? I firmly believe that writing well is definitely harder than learning about market access and health economics. I think sort of being able to write clearly, concisely, succinctly, doing the data analysis and being able to do that takes a lot more training than going on some courses or doing some projects about health economics and market access. So writing well is harder, and if you can write well, then I think you can make the transition. And a good agency will support you with the mentoring and training that you need for that market access and health economics aspect. In terms of what training I think is helpful in terms of making that transition, I think on-the-job training is always helpful. Proactive project work, coaching, get feedback on your work, ask lots of questions. There are external training courses, often sort of short courses, half a day here, 1 or 2 days here and there. York, Sheffield and Oxford, they all run quite good courses. If you get really keen, there are MSCs that you can do. I'm not convinced that you necessarily need to do them. I haven't done one. I think you can understand enough about health economics without needing to do that. There are plenty of free resources out there as well. You can attend nice committee meetings, for example, so you can understand the discussions that go on in those payer meetings. And there's a lot of information out there, webinars, online research. So, keep an eye on LinkedIn. And I've included a list at the end of this presentation on helpful resources as well. So I think that's probably enough from me for now. I'll hand over to Andria so she can give a bit of an overview of what life is like as a market access writer.
Yes, thanks, Nick. Yeah, so I actually first started my medical writing career within market access. So there were quite a few areas that I felt I needed a bit more support with, and that included the writing, reviewing, project management as well, because I wasn't familiar before starting in market access, but also specific processes of market access in different countries that Nick mentioned earlier, different types of economic evaluations and models used, especially in the UK, and as well as the so many acronyms that are used in market access that I feel like I'm still learning, to be honest. But in order to kind of get that knowledge and keep training, really, there was quite a variety of methods. So it wasn't really black and white that, oh, I've done this or I've done that. So mentoring is really important. Talking with colleagues, asking what you don't know, talking with your coach, and all of that on the job. Training courses can be very useful. I've done an economic evaluation training course that was just half a day, and that was a very nice introduction for me. Learning during projects, I find the most helpful way. You're basically learning as you go, and you can get all the theory and put it into practice as well. But I think that doing your own research is very, very important in your kind of learning journey, at least for me it was. Things that I don't know or that I feel like I want to learn more about, I always research first by myself, finding different resources, different webinars online and everything. And it also provides an opportunity to kind of identify what training needs I had, and to then communicate those with my coach. So yeah, it's not just one or the other. I think it's you learn in so many different ways. And so for the last couple of minutes, we thought I'll just give you a bit of an overview of how my day looks like. So in redthread, we have flexible working, which is great for me because I absolutely love working in the morning. I know this is not everyone's cup of tea, but I typically start my day about 7 a.m. Where I kind of catch up on emails, looking at my to-do list and everything. And then I start on my project work when I'm nice and fresh. So at the moment, we're working on a pay-a-value proposition. So I'd incorporate the client amends in the project before sending it to the project lead for review. After a couple of hours of working, I have like a nice coffee break, have a snack and everything, and then go into a client meeting. So in this particular day, we're discussing a global value dossier with the client, discussing on timelines and the review processes and everything like that. And then I'd follow up with the client of what we discussed in the meeting and what the next steps would be for both of us and on their side. One thing I find very useful is to actually turn off my email notifications, so I can just focus on what I need to do. So before I have my lunch break, I then catch up on emails and review my to-do list for the rest of the day. I always try to go out for a walk at lunch, just kind of clear my head and come back nice and fresh. And then after lunch, get on more project work. So we're also working on a nice fast track appraisal submission at the moment. So I'd spend however long I need on a particular section, writing in that document. And I then have another coffee break before having an internal meeting with the coach. We usually discuss things like, the weekly tasks, workload, just having a bit of a catch up as well of just how life is going in general. And then I typically finish around 4 o'clock or thereabouts, where I finish my tasks for the day, and then I kind of prepare my to-do list for the following day. So I find that flexible working works really well for me, especially because I like to start quite early. So yeah, I'm very much enjoying that aspect. But you can also see that there's such a variety of both the project types that we get to work on, but also the disease areas. So it's never really boring at all. You kind of get a lot of variety and a lot of things going on, which I think is my favorite part, to be honest, being in market access. And I think that's it from us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going to leave this slide up because I said there were some helpful resources. I'll stop sharing it in a second, but just so that these are the some of the helpful resources I think from an access perspective. So ISPOR is a International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research. I think that's right. And there's lots of good information on there about different healthcare systems, etc. The King's Fund I find really, really helpful to try and get my head around the constantly shifting sands of the UK healthcare system. NICE is obviously a great resource. It's got some really helpful information on there. I suspect a lot of you use it already for sort of the clinical aspects of projects as well. HERC is a health economics group in Oxford, does the course that Andrea mentioned. YHEC is the York Health Economics Consortium, and they do some good sort of short training courses, systematic review, modelling, etc., that I found quite helpful in the past. And similarly for SHAR, the Sheffield Health Economics as well. So I think those are some useful resources to check out if you're interested in finding out a little bit more. And I'm keen. I can see there's questions already coming in, and I'm keen to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I think we'll leave the presentation there.
Brilliant, brilliant, absolutely fantastic. Both of you, thank you very much. And I will say, I think I was paying attention. So the problem with market access, value comms, HEOR work is always the acronyms. You've both mentioned it, sort of thing. But I think we managed to get through that presentation without throwing too many acronyms around, without explaining them, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much. Having said that, if anyone in the audience has spotted anything they didn't understand, please ask us the question. A reminder to the audience here, thank you very much for joining up. We've got a Q&A button, a chat button. You can call up text boxes and send in your questions, and we'll weave that into the discussion. Guys, so a couple of things from me. I suppose one important point is we're talking about writing in value comms, right? And I want to focus in on writing, but there is a broader group of people, the analysts and so on, okay? But we are talking about writing today. One thing that I will just plug is that the careers guide that we publish at First MedComms Job about HEOR market access work is a useful reference source that people can go to, and they'll find profiles and explanation of some of this stuff and so on. But I you know, it's all very, the careers guides are great, but I love having people on talking about this stuff because it sort of brings it alive a little bit more. We can talk a bit more about what's happening and get a real sense from you for what you do. I'd like to, if I may, because I'm just going to wing this a little bit and see what comes in from the audience, but I'd like to split in a couple of directions here. And I'm going to start with Andrea, if I may. If I'm understanding things correctly, you came in from academia essentially into market access specifically, right? I'd like to address, Nick, maybe a little bit the coming across from different forms of writing into this sort of writing. But I'm just curious, Andrea, at the end of the day, how did you find out about it? What was your thought processes? Did you spot, I don't know, market access as an area and think that's what I want to do? And as I say, you've got a PhD, haven't you? I mean, one of my questions, and one of the questions which will come in if we don't ask it, is how important is the PhD to come in? So, sorry, there were several questions in there, but just gives a sense of sitting outside the business and going, why did you want to move? What were you looking for, and what did you find? And did you find it when you came into market access? Yeah. Can you just give us a bit of a flavour?
Sure. So I actually, after I finished my PhD, I was working in like industry research. So I was still a scientist, basically, right. But I was still in research environment. And after a few years, I knew that wasn't for me, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So to be honest, I just started researching other areas of work that are they still have that research part in it a little bit, but it's just not lab work. yeah, so I went through it was quite a few months actually that I was looking for things, and then the medical writing kind of seemed yeah, it seemed quite interesting, but I didn't know a lot about market access or what it was until I started working in it. So going into it, I just kind of thought, well, I'm just going to try it, and then if it doesn't work, then I'll look for something else. So yeah, I can't say I knew a lot really before I started, but yeah, I'm really enjoying it now, because you do have that research kind of feel to it. So you're still learning, and it's not, you know, it's quite interesting, but you're not like on one project. So I find that quite, yeah, quite interesting. Of, you know, I get to learn loads of different things without really doing any of the lab work. Yeah, that was quite good.
Okay, so so essentially you were looking at medical writing. It was medical writing
Yeah.
that appealed to you, and you sort of fell into market access
Yeah.
as a specialism within market, within MedComms or the wider medical communications field. I mean, and Nick, bring you in a little bit, but maybe just a little bit of context here from my point of view as I see it. You know, MedComms is a bit of a catch-all, but let's use MedComms as the theme. Medical communications and so on. The evolution of market access specifically in HEOR value comms type work, you know, it's evolved over the last few years into real specialism in itself, isn't it? And there are agencies, lots of agencies do a bit, some do quite a bit, and some agencies specialize in. You're at that end where you specialize in this particular sort of writing, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, we are, and I think, you know, it's getting into sort of more business discussions rather than anything else. But I think where clients really value having that expertise is that intersection between being able to write well and being able to understand market access. Because I think there's a lot of market access consultancies who sort of understand the ins and outs of reimbursement and tendering and contracts in, you know, EU5 and X number of other markets, but they sometimes fall down a bit on the quality of the writing. And there's a lot of agencies who are really good at the writing, but it takes a lot of time to get your head into the market access space as well. So being able to bring the two together, I think is certainly something that clients value. But it is challenging to find people who can do that already, which is why, you know, we're very happy to support in terms of training, etc. Because, you know, I personally believe that there's a lot of people out there who would really enjoy working in value communications and sort of understanding a little bit more about funding and health economics, etc. But that maybe either don't know about it or a little bit worried about making that transition. And I guess my message today is, you know, it might look like a black box. It's really not as complicated as maybe you think from the outside. And you know, the acronyms or whatever, they certainly don't help, because you just look at it, I don't understand any of this. And once you start to get your head around it a little bit, then I think there are real opportunities there for people to just to try it.
Okay, and I'm going to ask the difficult question, I know, but let's ask it anyway, because I'd always ask it in this sort of conversation. Is what I'm intrigued about is, you know, if you're looking to bring writers into market access / value comms, what is it that what is it you're looking for in a writer, a potential writer? Let's go for because there's two groups, as I say, we're sort of talking to. Let's follow the Andria type scenario. Okay, so you're looking at people who are coming into writing. What is it you're looking for in those guys that's different, if there's any difference, to what you'd be looking for in a more general MedCom setting? Do you see what I'm saying? Are there particular strengths or attributes that you're looking for that suit value comms, or isn't there?
I'm not convinced that there's anything that one would be able to pull out during the interview process that I think would make a difference, to be perfectly honest. I think for me, the skills that I'm looking for in terms of people who want to become medical writers are, you know, ability to synthesize information, to commensurate with their current level, to be able to write that down, and looking for sort of clarity of thinking and being able to pick out from this, what are the key bits of information that we need to pull out? And my personal preference is for a very visual style of communication. So we've got some of that in our assessment that we have is, you know, can you present this information, you know, in a way that is engaging to look at, because that's one of the challenges certainly in value communications. There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it can sometimes be quite dry when you're looking at you know, the ins and outs of health economic models, etc. So what we're always looking to try and do is, how do you communicate that clearly and engagingly, if that's even a word. So I'm not entirely sure it is, but that's we're looking for the thinking and the potential, really. And to be perfectly honest, I think MedComms agencies would be looking for that too.
Exactly. And so as I say, I suppose I'm trying to make the point that actually there isn't the magic answer. You know, I guess it's down to whether people are interested in the sorts of work you do, the sorts of audiences. You know, that I can see that someone might go, well, that's an interesting area, but I don't have to be a certain sort of person beyond what I would have to be anyway. I think that's just a useful, important point. And to cover it off, although it's not coming yet, but it's always a question. You know, do you need a PhD if you were looking at someone coming in? You don't need a PhD.
No. I mean, I think, you know, it's probably the age-old chestnut, whereby a PhD gives you a lot of skills that are really helpful as you start your writing. It's not the letters on a piece of paper that's important, but it's the ability to synthesize information and write down clearly. And you just have more practice at that during a PhD, which is why I think most people who start out usually have a PhD. And partly because I think academia has a tendency to spit out slightly disgruntled graduate / postdocs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, I've got you. And then if we switch it a little bit to people in MedComms or the broader medical writing sort of arena, I think one of your clear messages is this is an interesting area to specialize in. Yeah. And again, your comment is very clear and very sensible, is we're not looking for anything special really, because what you're doing is probably the sort of skill we want. But you want an interest in delivering this to the patients in a market access environment and so on. But I mean, is there any more to say on that? Is it as simple as that? Is there any more you can say on that? What might attract someone from outside of market access into market access?
It's a good question. I think it comes down to individual people's motivations. Like for me, I mean, so my background is that I was a PhD student, knew I didn't want to continue in academia, came along to some of your networking things, thought, medical communications look really good. And I was set to join an agency, and I had a choice between, I didn't have a choice, sorry, there was a choice between the neuroscience team and the value communications team. And I just done my PhD in neuroscience, so I was very much up for the neuroscience team, and they put me in the value communications team. And I was a little bit miffed at the time, because I was like, well, neuroscience is what I like to do. And 10 years later, I'm still doing value communications because I think it's really interesting, and I've set up an agency. So I think in terms of making that transition, I think you probably just get a bit set in do medical communications, so I'll just keep doing it. And it's easy to get sort of on that path. I think personally, I find it interesting to learn about the other aspects of market access, how healthcare systems work, how healthcare works in other countries, how those decisions about who is allowed what treatments, what's funded and what isn't funded, how that happens. And for me, and we do quite a lot of UK access work, for me, I love that it's really close. It feels really close to the patient, working on a NICE submission or whatever it is, or local access materials, and what you're working on supports the patient actually being able to get the therapy. So I really enjoy those projects for that reason, because it feels close to the patient.
Yeah. Okay. And again, lots of people are working in my experience, a lot of people working in this sort of area say the same thing. There's a very real sense of the patient benefiting. There's a questions coming in from Tammy. I just thought this was quite an interesting question actually from Tammy, in terms of the project pipeline as she describes it. So where are you getting business from, and how does that differ from maybe other areas of MedComms? I think I can see that will be a different group of people that you're sort of working with. Sorry, I'm not putting words in your mouth. You answer the question. Sorry.
No. And so in terms of who we work with, there are sort of specific market access functions within pharmaceutical companies, and we would work with them, and they have responsibilities for essentially ensuring funding, reimbursement for their therapy. I'm sort of guessing a little bit where Tammy's question is coming from, but for MedComms projects, MedComms accounts, I think you often have these big programs of work where like, okay, we'll sit down at the beginning of the year and this is the publication plan for this year. And I'm being overly simplistic, but you're going to publish at X conference, Y conference, Z conference, and there'll be maybe an encore, and you're going to follow up with a publication, this, that, and the other. So you can map out $250,000 or whatever it is in terms of business for a year. Value communications is probably more on a project by project basis. And so we do quite a bit of due diligence in terms of understanding the competitive landscape, what the timings are for launch, and understanding really what the overall landscape is for that particular therapy, and understanding what evidence they've got, coming up, and building that into essentially a strategy and a plan. But there is, sometimes you can put together a larger program of work. Often it's sort of individual projects here and there. I'm not sure whether that necessarily answers the question, but.
Okay, I'm just going to go a little bit further, and maybe I'm also missing the point slightly, but typical MedComms, we're oversimplifying things. It might be the commercial side, it might be the medical affairs teams. Within the sort of area you're working with, you're working with specialist HEOR type, market access type people, aren't you, within, say, a pharma company? So maybe that's, and I don't know, but maybe that's what Tammy's touched on, is there are groups within pharma, say, who are working specifically with you on value communications type projects, which might be a little bit different to the sorts of people that would work on a pubs pan for clinicians sort of thing.
Yeah, so they would be different parts of the pharma organization, definitely. I think market access is often sort of divvied up slightly differently in different organizations. Sometimes it's called market access, patient value access. Sometimes it's HEOR. HEOR tends to be a bit more sort of broadly technical, evidence generation, etc. And market access may be a little bit more about sort of pricing and funding, but it really depends on the individual company. But those are the two sort of general sort of stakeholders that we have within the pharma organization, essentially HEOR and market access.
Yeah, okay. Just picking up on Sarah's point there, do you do much in medical devices? She's asking specifically, do you know of any courses?
Do any courses?
Do you work much in medical devices?
At the moment, no. It's sort of how the projects fall. I think it's there are agencies, I think, that specialize more in medical devices as well, but it isn't something that we do in a great deal of detail at the moment. In terms of Sarah's question, the short answer is I don't know.
Okay, well, that's easy, that's fine. We don't know the answer, Sarah, but it was worth asking. A couple of quick silly questions maybe. In the sort of work you do, I mean, again, I'm thinking MedComms generally. I know we're not traveling very much at the moment. There's a lot of conference work, there's a lot of conference reporting and so on. Does that apply to you in the same way? I always think you guys are more involved in the dossier side of things than that sort of traveling around, sort of doing conference reporting and advisory groups in that sort of way. But is that a fair distinction, or is it not?
No.
Okay.
But we don't tend to do many conference reports, I would say, but we do quite a few advisory boards, and there's often sort of workshop pieces that go alongside doing a value proposition, for example. So a value proposition, because it's sort of the core value of a drug, they're very collaborative projects. So that wouldn't just be market access on its own, putting that together. That would be market access working with all of the other functions, medical, regulatory, etc., within an organization. So for those sorts of collaborative projects, it's quite helpful to have people, on the same call, or previously in the same room. And so, you would travel to go and facilitate those workshops. And certainly from an access perspective, you would have a payer advisory board, to which you would usually have sort of one or two clinicians coming along as well to give their perspective and their input as well. But you would certainly have, advisory boards that we do and have done.
Okay, no, I'm with you. Okay. Andrea, we've got an eye on the clock as always. I'm slightly late, but Andrea, I'm going to bring you in. And just frankly and simply, and this isn't contrived. I haven't asked you to prepare anything here, so this is always the I don't know what I'm going to say, Peter. But just if someone's interested in getting involved as a medical writer in value comms and so on, have you got a little bit of advice just for, you know, the sorts of things they should be thinking about?
I think, to be honest, as long as you are kind of open in learning new things, and you have like a critical thinking process, that's pretty much it. And yeah, and also just be, I guess, be personally prepared to just do that step in your career. I think that can sometimes be the scary bit of leaving something that you're kind of comfortable in going something that you don't know, especially if you don't know if you're going to like it, but you'll never find out if you don't do it. So yeah, I don't really have any, you know, specific tips or anything, just kind of be open.
And I suppose it's, again, a silly question, but no regrets. I mean, you're enjoying what you're doing. Has there been anything very different once you've got inside versus what you thought from the outside?
I didn't really have any expectations, to be honest, so that made it a bit easier.
That's easy then, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very easy. But no, I'm enjoying it. I think maybe the only thing that I thought beforehand is that it would just be one type of project. I would just be like writing, sort of like like I wrote my thesis, which is definitely not true, which is a nice surprise, to be honest. Yeah. Okay,
no, that's cool. It's a good, important message to get out there. There's a lot of variety in this work as well. So, thank you. I'm going to wrap it up. But Nick, I think that was great, and I think that an important point you were making, and you've made it well and several times essentially, is that, you know, this is an area, medical writers, there's lots of writers out there, you know, this is an area not to be scared of, to come in. You know, you can learn about the area you want, but you're interested in their writing skills. You know, writing skills is you know, and MedComms is very good at training people up as medical writers, I think, as an overall. So I think it's an interesting message to put out there that, you know, wherever you are in the business, health economics, value comms, and so on is an interesting area to move into, maybe, that some people won't have thought about, and not to be sort of put off by these acronyms, which are always slightly scary from the outside, or from where I'm sitting anyway. So what I'm going to do now, if that's okay, I'm just having a quick look, and we have got a few more questions that I'm going to pick up on in the next 10 minutes or so, okay, which is great. But for the purposes of today and the recording, I think we've come to a nice point where we can draw a line. Those of you who are listening to us, please don't rush away if you don't want to. We've got 10 minutes to cover off some of these questions. If anybody is interested in more about what we're talking about, Nick and Andrea, I know you're perfectly happy for people to contact you. LinkedIn is an easy way, or you put your contact details up earlier on, but you're very happy to talk to people. I'm very happy if anyone's interested in what we're doing to hear from people. If you're interested in what I'm doing, medcommsnetworking.com is the place to go. First, medcommsjot.com is the place to go if you're interested in what all this business is about. You'll find careers guides like the HOR Market Access Careers Guide. But NetworkPharma TV is the other place just to plug, where there's loads and loads of these videos. So there's lots of resources now to hopefully explain a bit more and give more insight into what we're all doing. So on that note, thank you, everyone. And I'm just going to ask you to give a quick wave as I stop the recording, okay? So thank you very much. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.